Just fix the pipes and get out, old man. We're not paying you for your life story. The words, slick with the unearned arrogance of youth, sliced through the quiet hum of the old garage. Chad, all sharp angles and expensive cologne, gestured dismissively at a leaking overhead pipe, a sneer plastered on his face. His partner, Brad, leaned against the doorframe of their gleaming, sterile office upstairs, looking down into the cavernous space of Art's Auto Repair as if surveying a peasant's hovel. Arthur Jenkins, his hands stained with the permanent memory of oil and his back aching with the wisdom of 73 years, simply nodded. He didn't look at them. He looked at the pipe, at the steady drip, drip, drip that was eating away at the plaster. He had seen worse leaks, under far more pressure. He had plug holes in things far more critical than a water pipe, with far less to work with than a wrench and some sealant. "I'll take care of it," he said, his voice a low rumble, like an engine that had run for 1,000,000 miles and still had 1,000,000 to go. He didn't see the eye-roll Chad and Brad shared. He didn't need to. He could feel the weight of their condescension. It was a familiar weight, one he had learned to carry in this new, loud world that had forgotten the value of silence, of patience, of hands that knew how to build and fix rather than just swipe and tap. Type honor in the comments below if you believe true heroes walk among us, unseen and unheard. Arthur's garage was a relic, an anchor holding a small piece of the block to a bygone era. The air was thick with the scent of gasoline, rubber, and hard work. Tools, worn smooth by decades of use, hung in their designated places on the pegboard walls, each one a testament to a problem solved, a machine brought back to life. Sunlight struggled through the grimy panes of the high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits in the air. For 45 years, this garage had been his sanctuary. He'd inherited it from his own father, a man who believed that a person's worth could be measured by the calluses on their hands. Arthur had raised a family on the income from this place, sent a daughter to college, and buried a wife who had loved the smell of motor oil on his clothes because it meant he was home safe. Now, everything was changing. The old brick building had been bought by Synergistic Innovations, a tech startup run by Chad and Brad. They saw the garage not as a legacy, but as wasted square footage. They wanted to expand their server farm, to create another open-concept workspace with beanbag chairs and a kombucha tap. An old mechanic's garage was an eyesore, an analog anachronism in their digital empire. From the day they moved in upstairs, they had treated Arthur like a ghost who was haunting their property. They complained about the noise of the impact wrench, the smell of the solvents, the very sight of his faded blue overalls. They sent him terse emails from their office 20 feet above his head, and their property manager, a woman named Ms. Albright with a clipboard for a heart, delivered eviction notices with cold, procedural satisfaction. "Mr. Jenkins," she had said just last week, her voice devoid of any warmth, "market rates are what they are. Your lease is month to month. Frankly, it's a miracle it wasn't terminated sooner. The new owners have a vision, and it requires modernization." Arthur had just looked at her, his hands resting on the worn fender of a 1968 Ford Mustang he was lovingly restoring. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply asked, "Where am I supposed to go?" Ms. Albright had offered a thin, pitying smile. "That's not really the company's concern, is it? You have 30 days. The 30 days were almost up. The pressure was mounting, a quiet, crushing force. Yet Arthur arrived every morning at dawn, unlocked the heavy bay door, and went to work. He had a duty to his customers, to the cars that were entrusted to him. He found solace in the logic of an engine, the tangible satisfaction of a problem diagnosed and solved. It was a world that made sense, unlike the world of synergy and disruption upstairs. Leo, a young man Arthur had hired a few years back, watched the slow-motion siege with growing unease. He saw the way Chad and Brad would smirk as they walked past, the way Ms. Albright would inspect the premises as if searching for a health code violation to expedite the eviction. "You should fight them, Art," Leo said one afternoon, wiping grease from a socket wrench. "Get a lawyer. They can't just throw you out." Arthur was tightening a bolt, his movements precise and economical. "Fighting takes energy, son. I prefer to use mine to fix what's broken. His gaze lingered on the Mustang's engine block. He was talking about more than just cars. The disrespect was a daily ritual. Chad would often stand at the top of the stairs, talking loudly on his phone about venture capital and stock options, deliberately making Arthur feel small and obsolete. No, no, we're clearing out the fossil downstairs soon, he'd say, loud enough for the entire garage to hear. Total gut job. Imagine a full-service cafe right here. Cold brew on tap. Brad was subtler, his cruelty more refined. He'd bring his high-tech, all-electric luxury car to the garage, not for service, but to park it in the most inconvenient spot possible. One day, he'd toss the keys to Arthur. Give her a wash, will you, Pops? Try not to scratch the paint with those dinosaur hands of yours. Arthur had simply caught the keys, his face an unreadable mask, and washed the car. He washed it better than any automated machine could, his gnarled fingers carefully cleaning every spoke on the wheels, his movements slow and deliberate. When he was done, the car gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a stark contrast to the gritty authenticity of its surroundings. He left the keys on the driver's seat and went back to the Mustang. He never said a word about payment. The final notice came on a Tuesday. It was a stark, white envelope delivered by a courier. It gave him 7 days. 7 days to dismantle a life's work. 7 days to pack up 45 years of memories. Leo was furious. This is garbage, Art. We have to do something. Arthur read the letter, his expression unchanging. He folded it neatly, tucked it into the pocket of his overalls, and picked up a timing light. This carburetor needs adjusting, he said softly. Let's focus on the work at hand. That was his way. He faced every storm by focusing on the single, necessary task in front of him. It was a discipline forged in a place much louder and more dangerous than this garage. The trigger event, when it came, was not a dramatic explosion, but a simple drip that became a torrent. The pipe that Chad had sneered about earlier in the week chose that afternoon to burst completely. Water, brown and angry, gushed from the ceiling, flooding the corner of the garage where Arthur kept his oldest tools and a small, locked footlocker. It cascaded down onto the pristine concrete floor that Chad and Brad had just paid to have sealed in their section of the building, threatening to seep into their precious server room. An alarm blared from upstairs. Seconds later, Chad and Brad came storming down the stairs, their faces contorted with panic and rage. What did you do? Chad shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Arthur. You did this. You sabotaged it. The pipe was old. I told you it needed to be replaced, not patched, Arthur said calmly, already wading into the growing puddle, grabbing a large wrench from his toolbox. The water was soaking his overalls, plastering them to his skin. You're incompetent, Brad yelled, frantically tapping at his phone. Our servers could be fried. We're talking millions in damages. You're finished, you hear me? Finished. Arthur ignored them. He reached up, his old muscles straining, and began to work on the main shut-off valve near the brake. It was rusted tight. He put his entire body into it, his knuckles white on the handle of the wrench. The water was cold, seeping into his bones, but he didn't flinch. He gritted his teeth, a low grunt escaping his lips as he put every ounce of his strength into the task. The fabric of his overalls was soaked through, and the sleeve on his right arm, already worn thin from years of labor, finally gave way. It ripped from the elbow to the shoulder, the wet cloth tearing with a soft, final sound. And there, on his weathered bicep, it was revealed, faded by time and sun, the lines blurred by age, but still utterly unmistakable, the eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps. It was an old-school tattoo, stark and proud, a silent declaration on his skin. Chad, in mid-rant, stopped. His mouth hung open. Brad lowered his phone. Even Ms. Albright, who had arrived to assess the situation, paused in her note-taking. They all stared at the tattoo. It seemed so out of place on this quiet, stooped old man. It was a symbol of aggression, of power, of a world far removed from oil changes and tire rotations. Chad was the first to recover, his arrogance quickly reasserting itself as mockery. Oh, look at that, he sneered, a cruel laugh in his voice. A tough guy tattoo. What? Did you serve a weekend in the reserves, Grandpa? Bet you got that in some back alley parlor after a few too many beers. Arthur didn't respond. He gave the valve one last, mighty heave. With a groan of protesting metal, it finally turned. The gushing water slowed to a trickle, then stopped. The sudden silence in the garage was deafening, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of the remaining water. Arthur stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, his torn, wet sleeve hanging loose, the tattoo exposed for all to see. A flicker of something ancient and weary passed through his eyes, a shadow of a memory, before the calm mask slipped back into place. He turned, his gaze sweeping over their stunned, mocking faces, and for the first time, he didn't look away. He just held their gaze, and in his silence, there was a power they could not comprehend. The day's chaos was far from over. As if summoned by the drama, a massive, matte black transport truck was attempting to back into the alley beside the building. It was a custom vehicle, looking more like an armored personnel carrier than a delivery truck, and it was carrying the centerpiece of Synergistic Innovations' new government contract, a quantum computing server worth more than the entire building. The contract was their big break, the thing that would elevate them from a noisy startup to a major player. Suddenly, with a hideous screech of tortured metal and a puff of black smoke, the truck shuddered to a halt, blocking the entire alley. The driver, a man in a crisp uniform, jumped out, his face a mask of panic. He popped the hood, revealing a complex, unfamiliar engine. He tinkered for a few minutes before throwing his hands up in despair. Upstairs, Chad and Brad were watching from their window, their earlier anger at the flood replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. The man who had commissioned this server, their golden goose, was on his way to personally oversee the installation. His arrival was imminent. A delay like this was not just an inconvenience. It was a catastrophe that could vaporize their company. They flew down the stairs again. "You!" Brad shouted, his voice cracking. He pointed at Arthur, who was now using a heavy-duty squeegee to push the water out of the bay door. "You're a mechanic. Fix it." Arthur paused, leaning on the squeegee. He looked at the disabled truck, then back at Brad's frantic face. "That's not a standard civilian vehicle. It's a modified Oshkosh. Military spec. I don't care if it's a spaceship." Chad screamed, his composure completely shattered. "Our entire future is in that truck. Can you fix it or not?" His tone was still demanding, but the desperation was unmistakable. Leo stepped forward. "We don't have the diagnostic tools for that, Art. We can make it worse." Arthur didn't answer right away. He walked slowly toward the truck, his wet boots squelching on the concrete. He peered into the engine bay, his eyes scanning the intricate web of hoses, wires, and armor-plated components. His expression was one of intense concentration, the way a scholar might read a forgotten text. He pointed. "The primary coolant line to the turbocharger is sheared. Looks like it vibrated loose and got chewed up by the serpentine belt." He looked at the panicked driver. "You got a spare?" The driver shook his head, looking miserable. "It's a custom part. We'd have to tow it to a military base. It would take days. Days they didn't have." Chad looked like he was about to be physically ill. Arthur was silent for a long moment. He looked at the broken line, then around his own garage, his eyes cataloging his inventory of parts and tools. A plan began to form behind his quiet gaze. "I might be able to fabricate a bypass," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "It won't be pretty, but it might hold long enough to get it inside." "Then do it," Brad urged, his voice a desperate plea. "We'll pay you. We'll pay you whatever you want." Arthur gave a short, humorless laugh. He wasn't thinking about money. He walked back into his garage, heading for a metal lathe in the corner, a machine almost as old as he was. He moved with a renewed sense of purpose. This was a problem, a complex, critical problem, and he knew how to fix it. As he began to work, expertly cutting and shaping a piece of high-pressure hydraulic hose from his own stock, a convoy of black government SUVs turned the corner at the end of the street. They moved with an intimidating, silent efficiency, pulling up and forming a secure perimeter around the alley. Chad and Brad's faces went white. They smoothed their designer shirts and tried to compose themselves. This was it, the moment of truth. Doors opened, and several serious-looking men in dark suits and earpieces emerged, their eyes scanning everything. Then, the rear door of the lead vehicle opened. Out stepped a man who commanded attention without saying a word. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his posture ramrod straight. He wore the immaculate class, a uniform of a 4-star general of the United States Marine Corps, his chest a dazzling constellation of ribbons and medals. His face was weathered, etched with the lines of command and heavy decisions. It was a face that had seen the best and worst of humanity. This was General Marcus Thorne, a living legend in the armed forces and a powerful figure in the Department of Defense. Chad and Brad scurried forward, hands outstretched, sycophantic smiles plastered on their faces. "General Thorne, an honor, sir. A tremendous honor." Chad began. "We apologize for this minor delay. We've had some infrastructure issues, and the local help has proven rather incompetent." He shot a venomous glare toward Arthur, who was still hunched over his workbench, oblivious to the grand arrival. General Thorne did not look at them. He did not shake their hands. His piercing blue eyes swept the scene, the stalled truck, the flooded garage floor, the men in suits, and finally, the old mechanic in soaked overalls with a torn sleeve, working intently at a lathe. The general's eyes narrowed. He took a few steps forward, his gaze fixed on the old man's back. He saw the faded tattoo on the exposed arm. The general froze. The air around him seemed to crackle with sudden tension. His professional, stoic demeanor dissolved, replaced by a look of utter disbelief, then dawning recognition, and finally, profound, overwhelming respect. He ignored the babbling tech bros completely and walked with purpose straight into the garage, his polished Corfam shoes splashing in the puddles. "Art," the general said. His voice, usually a booming command, was now quiet, hesitant, and filled with an emotion that stunned his aides into silence. Arthur finished brazing a custom fitting onto the hose he'd made. He carefully set down his torch, lifted his safety goggles, and turned around slowly. He looked at the 4-star general standing before him, a man he hadn't seen in nearly 50 years. A slow, weary smile touched his lips. "Marcus," he said, his voice raspy, "you're looking a little more formal than the last time I saw you." General Thorne's eyes welled up. He took another step forward, and in a move that sent a shock wave through the assembled crowd, he snapped to the sharpest, most reverent position of attention he had ever held. His hand came up in a salute so precise it could have been carved from stone. "Gunnery Sergeant Jenkins," the general's voice boomed, thick with emotion, echoing through the silent garage. "It is an honor, sir." Arthur looked at the general, then at his own greasy hands. He wiped them slowly on a rag, and with the creaking protest of old bones and older wounds, he straightened his back. He returned the salute, his form not as crisp as it once was, but filled with a dignity that transcended time. For a moment, they were not a general and a mechanic. They were two Marines, bridging a 50-year gap with a single, silent gesture of mutual respect. Chad, Brad, and Ms. Albright stood by the doorway, their mouths agape, their faces a pale canvas of confusion and horror. Their world, with its neat hierarchies of wealth and status, had just been turned upside down and shaken apart. General Thorne held his salute for a long moment before slowly lowering his hand. He turned his head, his gaze falling upon Chad and Brad with the force of a physical blow. His eyes were chips of ice, his voice dropping to a dangerously low growl that vibrated with contained fury. "You," he began, his voice cutting through the stunned silence, "called this man incompetent." Chad swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Sir, General, we didn't know." "You didn't know," the general repeated, the words dripping with contempt. He took a step toward them, and the two young entrepreneurs involuntarily flinched back as if he had struck them. "You didn't know that you were standing in the presence of a giant? You didn't know that the man you mock as a simple mechanic is Gunnery Sergeant Arthur Jenkins, a man whose name is spoken with reverence in the halls of Force Reconnaissance? A man whose hands, which you call dinosaur hands, have saved more lives than you could count in 100 lifetimes. The general's aides stood motionless, their faces grim. They had heard the stories, the legends of Gunny Jenkins, but none had ever imagined they would meet him here, in a run-down garage. Thorne turned his body back towards Arthur, but his words were a lecture, a sermon, a blistering indictment aimed at the arrogant fools beside him. Let me tell you who you've been trying to evict. In the winter of '68, during the Tet Offensive, a patrol from the 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion was pinned down in the ruins of an old pagoda, surrounded and outnumbered 10-1. Their radio was smashed, and they were taking heavy fire. Their only way out was a river, but their patrol boat's engine was shredded by shrapnel. They were dead. Every single one of them was dead. He paused, his eyes locking onto Arthur's. But they had a 20-year-old Lance Corporal mechanic with them, a kid named Art Jenkins. While bullets were chipping the stone all around him, he took apart that engine. Using a piece of a discarded Saracen can for a patch, his own belt for a fan belt, and a bootlace to rig the throttle, he rebuilt that engine under fire. He got it started. He got every single one of those men out of there alive. The general's voice cracked with emotion. I know this because I was the platoon's lieutenant. I was one of those men he saved. The silence was absolute. Brad's face was the color of ash. Ms. Albright's clipboard had slipped from her numb fingers and lay forgotten in a puddle. But he was just getting started. Thorne continued, his voice regaining its steel. Operation Desert Serpent. A medevac helicopter goes down deep in enemy territory. 2 pilots with critical injuries, a corpsman, and 3 wounded Marines on board. The rescue team can't get to them. A sandstorm is rolling in. It's a suicide mission. But Gunny Jenkins volunteers. He takes a busted-up Jeep that everyone said was only good for scrap metal, and he drives it straight into that storm. He gets to the crash site, stabilizes the wounded, and then he gets to work on the helicopter. Its main rotor is damaged. It should never have flown again. But Art Jenkins found a way. He cannibalized parts from the Jeep. He improvised. He worked miracles with a wrench and sheer force of will. He got that bird in the air just as enemy patrols were closing in, flying it himself with the injured co-pilot shouting instructions until they reached friendly lines. He gestured around the garage. You see these tools? You see this place you think is an eyesore? This isn't a garage. This is a sanctuary. This is the workshop of a master craftsman who treated every engine like a human heart, every vehicle like a life support system. The Navy Cross he received, the Silver Star, the 3 Purple Hearts, he never wore them. He said the only medal he cared about was seeing his men come home. He left the Corps after 20 years of service, quietly, without fanfare, because he'd had enough of the noise. He came back here to fix things, to find some peace. The general finally turned his full, wrathful attention back to Chad and Brad. And you with your soft hands and your self-important vision, you had the audacity to disrespect him, to try and throw him out of his home. You're not fit to wipe the grease from his boots. Arthur, who had stood silently through the entire speech, finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of decades. They didn't know. Marcus, it's a different world now. That is not an excuse. Thorne shot back, his loyalty fierce. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Yes, it's Thorne. I'm looking at the property on Elm Street. The one our Veterans Legacy Fund holds the primary mortgage on. Yes, that one. I'm calling in the note. Effective immediately. And I want to know about the tenants in the upstairs commercial space. Synergistic Innovations. Check their compliance with the Patriot provision in their lease agreement. I thought so. Consider their lease terminated. Effective immediately. He hung up. Chad and Brad stared at him, their dreams of a kombucha tap and $1 billion valuation turning to dust before their eyes. You can't do that, Chad stammered. I can, the general stated flatly. And I have. This building will be placed in a trust. Its sole purpose will be to provide a home for this garage, for as long as Mr. Jenkins wishes it to be here. After that, it will be used to help other veterans start their own businesses. Your eviction notice is rescinded, Ms. Albright. You, however, are fired. He then walked over to the stalled transport truck. Arthur was already there, holding the bypass hose he had fabricated. This should hold, Arthur said simply. Together, the 4-star general and the old mechanic leaned into the engine bay. The general held the flashlight, his uniformed arm shoulder to shoulder with Arthur's, the crisp fabric brushing against the faded, tattooed skin. In minutes, the bypass was installed. Arthur wiped his hands. "Try it now," he told the driver. The driver, his face a mixture of awe and terror, climbed into the cab and turned the key. The massive engine sputtered once, twice, and then roared to life, settling into a steady, powerful hum. A spontaneous cheer went up from the general's aides. The conflict was over. The vindication was absolute. Arthur Jenkins had not raised his voice, had not thrown a punch, had not even filed a complaint. He had simply endured, and in the end, his character, forged in the crucible of service and sacrifice, had been the most powerful weapon of all. The two young tech moguls stood broken and humbled, their empire built on code and arrogance collapsing under the weight of a quiet hero's history. Ms. Albright was already walking away, a woman stripped of her petty authority. The resolution was swift and total, a testament to the fact that some debts of honor are never forgotten. General Thorne placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder. "It's good to see you, Gunny." His voice was soft again, the fury gone, replaced by a deep, abiding affection. "You too, Lieutenant," Arthur replied, a small twinkle in his eye. The story of what happened at Art's Auto Repair spread. The building was formally signed over to the new trust. Chad and Brad's company imploded, a victim of their own hubris and a canceled government contract. Leo, the young mechanic, stayed on with Arthur, no longer just an employee, but a devoted apprentice. He watched the old man with a new reverence, understanding that the lessons he was learning about fixing engines were also lessons about integrity, duty, and quiet strength. The central moral of the day was clear. You can never judge a person by their cover, by their age, or by the grease under their fingernails. True worth, true honor, is not displayed in fancy clothes or expensive cars. It is carried silently in the heart and soul, and sometimes it is etched into the skin as a faded reminder of a promise kept. The garage remained as it always was, a haven of honest work. But there was one small change. On the shelf above Arthur's primary workbench, next to a framed, black and white photo of his late wife, sat a single, heavy object. A 4-star General's Challenge coin, placed there as a permanent symbol of a bond that time could not break and disrespect could not tarnish. Arthur Jenkins continued to arrive at dawn each day, to unlock the heavy bay door, and to fix what was broken, his hands a testament to a life of service that asked for nothing in return, but was, in the end, given the respect it had always deserved. Subscribe to this channel if you believe that we should honor our veterans, not just with parades and holidays, but with our respect every single day. They are the giants who walk among us, and we owe them everything.